Right. Michael, I think you were first to go with CodeQL stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me begin sharing my screen. Um, so the discussion was very light that I put up about 2 weeks ago, and the discussion area for CodeQL. In light of that, I did not prepare a formal presentation because I like to discuss this a bit further, or at least give another week for people to respond to this and just be aware um, that it would behoove them to go learn what CodeQL is and give feedback here, so that we can get everyone's input going into this process. But the basic idea behind this CodeQL discussion is that uh, as we need to run static analysis on the code. A lot of people, with EDK2 being an upstream project, they bring it into their product areas, usually privately within their own company, and they run static analysis tools of many different varieties against the EDK2 code and their product code. A lot of cases, or at least I've very rarely seen anyone push static analysis tool fixes back in the EDK2. So with this process, we're probably all redundantly fixing a lot of the same problems, probably ignoring a lot of the same false positives, and we're probably all paying for tools that might be able to be replaced by something that's free and more open source friendly um, on the EDK2 repo directly. And by exposing these issues and fixing these issues directly within the EDK2 repo, we can prevent all of us redundantly doing a bunch of the same work and make the code much higher quality in the upstream repo for everyone. So CodeQL is a way to do that. It's open source. It's directly managed by GitHub. So it, as I say here in the post, it has excellent integration into GitHub because of that. They recently acquired this company that was running LGTM, and because of that, this LGTM portal that was previously used to display CodeQL results has it's getting rolled into the GitHub code scanning feature. So that's where we'll be seeing the results from CodeQL output in the future. So all of this is kind of aligning in general to provide a lot of support around CodeQL and GitHub, and kind of meets some of the interception points that we have with moving towards GitHub as more of our workflow for things like PRs and potentially issues and stuff like that. Um, I demonstrated before that there was a PR I made as a proof of concept of just running CodeQL within our repository. So those details are here, including the PR link. Um, the basic process that we would follow is well, there'd be two pieces to this. One is cleaning up all of the existing issues. Um, that would be on the order of anywhere between 500 to 1,000 issues, depending on what queries we want to run. And we'll talk more about queries, but there's a lot of work to do there is the point. The second piece to this work is that once we are in a state that we are happy with in terms of we've picked out the queries that we want to run against our database generated for CodeQL, um, and those queries are passing, then we get into the point where we have to prevent new issues from appearing in the code. And so that would mean that we would need to run CodeQL against our pull request. CodeQL, in my experience, this depends on the build machine. It depends on what type of build you're doing, and it depends on what queries you're running. And there's a lot of factors. But generally, you can expect a clean build of um, a normal platform size. This would mean platform code containing a bunch of core packages and running a lot of platform code to take about 45 minutes. Um, so this will lengthen the time of our PRs, and I've only been able to run CodeQL against a clean set of code, and this is pretty clearly called out in the CodeQL documentation that they expect that whenever you generate a database, it's generated against clean code. So this is not necessarily an issue for us, because whenever we do PRs, we pull the code onto a clean build agent and build clean anyway. And our general contribution process, it has a minimum of 24 hours for code to go in. And so the timelines that we are working on, I don't think will be severely impacted by lengthening our builds by running CodeQL as part of the PR process. Eric, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to wait till you were done. So if you're done, I just had two questions, because I did look at CodeQL a bit after you pinged me on the discussion.
I can go ahead and take them now.
Sure. So one question was, it seemed like you could store all of your own queries and configs within the repository itself. No, I didn't actually pull any of the CodeQL stuff down and try it. But if that's the case, then it does have some advantages over other code scanning tools where you have to have configuration in a separate tool like SonarQube does, which would mean everyone would have to have access to those in order to maintain them. So storing the queries within the code itself is actually pretty advantageous here. Is that true? Just did my understanding of the project come through correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. So you can, whenever you're running CodeQL, and I put this down in another post. You can run you can select what queries you want to run. And you can do this with a YAML file that automatically gets picked up as part of the CodeQL query, or I mean the CodeQL GitHub action. So whenever it goes to run CodeQL against our code, you have a specially named YAML file. It picks up that YAML file and it runs what queries you say that you want in there. So that's one way to bring in queries, and those all come from the open source repo. The other way you can do it is you can actually put new QL files. Like, let's say we make our own custom queries, we can put those inside a special folder. I think it's like .codeql or something like that, or .lgtm or something. You put it in a special folder and it actually looks for QL files in there and it loads them up and runs them automatically against your database as well.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. So that's pretty advantageous if you have your own custom query logic, which I suspect we might have to do.
Yeah, I think so, because like if you look at some of these, so I put this down as a starting point. This comes from an SDL list that we also use against our code. So this is a subset of that SDL list. So these are ones that I'm recommending as a starting point. And if you go look at some of these queries, like unsafe STNRCat, right? So that one is going to look for a function signature that might be different than what we are using. So we could probably use like a lot of that query, but we might want to customize the function name or something else for the way that we have our string API set up. So I think we might want to make adjustments like that. And we probably want to run, because our code is so different than a lot of other C and C++ code, there's a good chance we'll want to write our own custom queries and stuff. So yeah, I agree that I think that's one nice advantage that we have, is especially as an open source community, that we can share queries easily with each other, and we can put those behind our normal source control and have them picked up as part of our process, our CI process.
Yeah, and another thing was, I wasn't sure if this can be run locally, right? I didn't see that in their documentation.
Yes, and I have that down here. So these
I
put just before the meeting because I knew they would come up.
Yeah, just taking them in here. I didn't read the rest of your items. I read it like when you tagged me and then you added these in. So, okay, sorry for asking redundant questions.
Well, yeah, this one here. So there's a thing called CodeQL CLI I linked to. That is the CodeQL command line interface. So you can run that locally, and there's two primary commands to be aware of for basically generating the database and then running queries against the database. And the first one is the database create command. So in this case, you just tell the CodeQL CLI to create the database. I'm naming the database CPP database. I'm saying that I want the language of that database to be C++, which is the same as C for CodeQL. And then this is the custom command that it needs to wrap around to be able to build that database. If people are not familiar with the Stewart build tools, this is another way to build MDE module package using those. And I put a link to the Stewart build tools here so you can learn how to use those if you don't know how. But this right here will build MDE module package, IE32 64-bit architectures on Visual Studio 2019, doing a debug target build, and CodeQL requires it to be a clean build. So I just threw that in. So in case you have done a build before, it will get you a clean build. And CodeQL doesn't need, it cares about the compiler output. It doesn't need all of our post-build stuff. It doesn't care about that. So I'm just telling it to skip post-build because that doesn't matter for the purposes of generating my database. So that's the command that you can use to generate your C++ database folder that has your CodeQL database in it. That is the command that on my machine, well, for MD module package, I think this is taking like 25 to 30 minutes or something.
So you said 45 before. That was
that was for a full platform. That would be like,
platform.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like, yeah, like if you take the typical platform code that integrates a bunch of core packages and has its own code, that's going to be about 45 minutes in my experience.
So then in the CI for Tiano, how do you propose to do this? I guess do you want to run the crypto package and the network package and MDE package all concurrently?
Yes, that's what when I did some evaluation of Open Coverity, I set up the script that would do all of the packages for all the supported architectures to register
okay.
those on a per package basis.
And those don't create duplicate issues, or I guess you have to address it. You would end up with duplicate issues potentially between them, wouldn't you?
You can, depending upon the depth of the analysis. So there's different static analysis tools have different scopes for what they can look at. A lot of them look at only the C file in isolation. And so the fact that it's making calls outside the C file, since it doesn't know, since we have like multiple library instances for each, API, it doesn't necessarily know which one is going to be linked to in the end. So it may not be able to do the external, linkage and scan from the C file that's open into those lower layers. It all depends on the capabilities, and I don't know what CodeQL's capabilities are for evaluating multiple call levels through multiple libraries relative to just a single C file.
Yeah, so the CodeQL will generate a flow graph of how the code is built. So I think it will generate some level of understanding of calls throughout the code, but that will be based on what you've linked inside your code, like what Mike's talking about. So ultimately, you can have many library instances that get plugged into different function implementations, right? And at link time, we have to choose which ones to put there. So CodeQL is not going to know about what you did not put there. It's just going to know about what you did put there. So if you're putting a null lib in one case and then you're linking it with another package that does not use a null lib, you will get different results. If you're running it across the same functions, yeah, you're going to get duplicate results likely. So that's all the more incentive to fix the problems. Is if you start to see duplicate results popping up, then that way we can get multiple people going to fix them, because we want to get to the point where we don't have any alerts popping up. I mean, we have the point here is we have full control over this process. We can choose what queries to put in, we can choose what packages to run this against, and we can choose when to run it. So there's no reason we should ever end up in a state where we have CodeQL alerts that are not resolved. Like, we should always have a resolution for them. So Yeah, I think we will have to, as we go through this, we'll have to figure out for the queries that we select and the results that we get in the different build types, we'll have to go through and fix them and get ourselves down to where we don't have any issues.
Before you enable it. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess
Kind
you
of,
could
yeah.
enable, you could silently enable it and not make it required, like in GitHub, right? You could just say run it, but don't make it a required status check, at
Yeah.
least temporarily until until all the issues have been resolved. So people can look at it and say, did I introduce any new issues, right?
Right.
Potentially. Okay.
And one of the
Actually,
things,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one of the things that CodeQL does that's nice too is it generates the database, and the database is separate from the queries. So once you generate a database, that means several things. You can share the database with other people, and they don't have to generate their own database. So if someone's saying, "Oh, I can't," there should never be a state where someone says, "I have a CodeQL issue," and someone else says, "I can't reproduce it." It should be reproducible because the build tracer should work the same way. But you can also just share your database with that person. And the other nice thing that it gives you is once you have the database, that describes your code as or describes the code as data. And so you can then run as many queries as you want against that. So if we choose to only run, let's say 15 queries by default against it, I can go grab a bunch of queries from anywhere on the internet. And LGTM.com, I think, has over 4,000 or 40,000 queries. I can go grab whatever queries I want and I can run them against that database, and I don't have to regenerate it because the database is the data the queries run against. They're not running against the code. So once that database is generated, you have quite a bit of flexibility and being able to experiment and play around with running lots of different queries against it, and it doesn't take a bunch of time to run those. So that's one of the nice things we get there. I'll just show quickly on lgtm.com what I'm talking about by query. So if you go to, lgtm.com, on here, there's going to be, this kind of gives you an overview of all the open source projects that are hooked in, and so you can look at the results of lots of different projects. So if you build a query, you can run the query on here and see the results against lots of different projects. But you can also see the queries themselves on here. So they have a query console, and once you select a project, you can. I'm not logged in, but you can come in here and you can run queries against it pretty easily, because as we generate databases and they get uploaded, and as it says, it'll go to GitHub code scanning in the future. But as databases get uploaded, running queries is pretty straightforward. So as databases are uploaded either here or to GitHub code scanning, you can just pull open this query console and run whatever queries you want and get the results really quickly against it.
Hey, Michael. Sorry,
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen a query before. Does it return it as like a JSON or TOML?
Let me show you. So I'll just click on one here because I made these links to the QL files. This is what a query looks like.
The output of the query.
Oh, the output of the query. Let me just find one on. So
Yeah,
I'm just
if you
going
don't
to
have an
type in.
example, that's fine, but
I'll type in EDK2 on here and see what just is available. This is all the EDK2 stuff. This is ours. I think it only got the Python files though, for some reason. This is what they look like.
I mean, they're nicely rendered here, but is there a raw like a raw output, like TOML file, for example? I'm just, what I'm trying to brainstorm here is if we did the pipeline and we run CodeQL on the main branch, then we can publish the database to, I guess, Azure pipeline support this. You can cache it somewhere and then pull it down in the pull request and try to do a diff to see if you introduced any new issues, at least in the short term, until all the issues are actually fixed, right?
Right.
I'm just trying to think, how can we enable it now without having to go fix all the issues, right? So if you can do a diff between the main branch and the current branch that you're building off of in the pull request and try to
Well,
see if the number of issues increased, then you can gate the pull request. And
well,
if
one
the
of the
issues
things,
remains the same, then you know you're okay.
well, one of the things that the GitHub action does is it already diffs the issues between branches. So whenever you say that you want to do a pull request into the main branch, it's going to diff your issues in your pull request against the main branch. So that or at least that's an option that we can do. So at that point, we'd be able to just see what the delta is between those two branches.
And maybe that's sufficient to just enable it right off the bat, right? Rather than try, because it's ideally you don't want to go dig through 50,000 issues and fix them before you can turn it on, right?
Yeah, we have different strategies about how we could do that. We could start with enabling one query and then building up our query set and fixing issues as we add them. So we basically just adopt new queries. And then as we bring them online, we fix the issues for them. That kind of gives us a incremental approach to enabling it. We can say that we have 15 queries and we need to go fix everything to enable all 15. That's another way to do it. And if we went that way, then what you're describing is a mitigation strategy we could use for being able to ensure that we're not going in the wrong direction while we're doing that work. So I think that there's we definitely have options in terms of how we want to enable it. That's part of one thing we'll have to figure out as we go through. But I do want to show.
I like the first proposal. You said just incrementally introduce the queries and fix them in the pull request where you introduce them. Yeah, that seems nice.
I do want to show really quickly because you touched on output. So most things get output to these Serif files. This is, and I mentioned this in my discussion. These right here are kind of standardized ways that static analysis tools report things. And because of that, there's a lot of viewers readily available to review these. So the Serif file is a file that you can output your results to. And once you do that, you can do things, and I put an example down here of like the VS Code Serif viewer. So this is an example of if you were to run the CodeQL CLI and you were to say, let's go back to my command. So whenever see how I'm outputting here to this Serif file, I can take this Serif file and I can open it with this viewer and I can view the results directly in VS Code. And I can view them in VS Code and I can click on them and they will take me directly to the file and the line number that the problem is on. So that's one way to kind of get your outputs into a raw file and then be able to bring that into something that knows how to view it. Another output format type of this analyze command here is CSV. So if I were to change this, I could say my format is CSV, so comma separated values instead of the Serif file. That would also work. So you can choose how you want your results to be output.
Yeah, this is cool. I wish we switched to this. I don't want to use SonarQube anymore after seeing all this.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, for those that use Visual Studio Code, that plugin makes it so that if you run the local CI, you can quickly resolve, issues locally before you put it up for the CI build that will do the scanning.
Yep. And there's also another plugin for VS Code that's really useful as well. That's the CodeQL plugin itself. So if you look for that one, it's this one right here, published by GitHub. So the other one's great for reading Serif files and being able to click right through to your source file that had the problem. This one right here can actually, it can load the database that you generate, and it can give you an abstract syntax tree of what the database represents. So it can read the data that was placed into the database and show you that as an AST. It can also allow you to run queries against the database directly in VS Code, which is pretty nice. So it has some information here about how you can open up a .ql file, just like the one I showed right here, right? This is conditionally uninitialized variable .ql. So you can open up this .ql file in VS Code using this plugin, and you can run it against your database, and it will give you the results directly in VS Code, and you can click through in them in the query results view. So that's another useful way to run a query locally and be able to quickly jump to the problem in the code. I guess the main thing I'm trying to show here is that there's kind of a community and an ecosystem around this that is fairly friendly for people working in open source, and it provides a bit more flexibility than a lot of other tools. So we have multiple plugins, we have multiple ways in order to be able to run this and customize what we're doing. So we have a lot of flexibility in general over the process. So that's kind of, I guess, what I wanted to update everyone on, was just to answer any questions and remind people that the discussions here, and kind of connect some of the points in the discussion to actual things, like different web pages and the way that you use things. But I did want to leave it up for about another week to see if anyone wants to go look at these links and maybe try CodeQL CLI locally, since I gave the command down here. You can also play around with some of the VS Code plugins or whatever you want to do, but just let me know what your thoughts are. And maybe one of the other things we can talk about in here over the next week is exactly how we would want to put this in EDK2 CI, in terms of, we touched on like running it on different packages and running it as part of PRs, maybe just solidify exactly what we would do there as part of that process. And then I can put together a more comprehensive end-to-end example and a slightly more formal presentation for an upcoming meeting.
A couple of quick questions. Michael, did you get a chance to review any of this with Felix?
I have notified him several times on this thread, including right here, but I have not heard anything back yet.
Okay. Yeah, you might try emailing him directly just to see if you can, because maybe he's got a rule that's that he's not seeing those notices. The second one is, and this was a challenge I ran into with Open Coverity, was combining results from multiple package builds versus keeping them separate. So it's really about that database that you mentioned. Is there any advice from CodeQL, and you have a large project that's maybe made up of multiple components? Do they recommend keeping separate databases for each like component or subsystem, or do they suggest merging the database from all the individual subsystems into a master database?
I haven't seen anyone merge them like that. But I do have some contacts in the CodeQL team I could ask that question to. I have some other questions out to them at the moment, so I can ask them that and see if they have any advice there.
Okay. Yeah, and if you look at what I put a link into what I did for Open Coverity, and that's basically just the database build is the GitHub action, because then it uploads the database to the Open Coverity server, where it then basically does all of its queries and then does the database management for the issues discovered. So building the database in this example that I provided the link to, it does every possible package build for every architecture, and it appends them all into one database. And then it's broken apart into subsystems up in the database viewer after analysis to say, oh, here's the issues for like the MD module package or the FAT package, by basically sorting the issues discovered by location. So it's just it's a question about how's this going to work when we scale up. I figured out a way that it could work with open Converity, and I think we have to figure out this equivalent, mechanism for CodeQL.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the main things I want to look at before making like a more detailed proposal about how we adopt it, is to get that piece in place. So I think you're right. I'll check with the CodeQL team if they have any advice here. But I would say that generating the serif results is kind of nice because you can open up multiple logs at the same time and you can diff them and things like that. But I think we want to make sure that we are running this, I guess, just the recommended way against all the code and then how we reconcile it. So that's what I'll check with them on.
Okay.
The other thing, oh,
go ahead.
I was going to mention, I was thinking about one more thing. Whenever you run the analyze command, I think it is, you can also pass a query, what's called a query suite. I just wanted to mention that really quick because I'm building a query suite for us now. And I think I mentioned that maybe somewhere on here. Maybe I didn't, but you can build a thing called a query suite. And whenever I ran this individual query here, you can actually run the whole query suite, which is a .qls file. So my vision for us running CodeQL and keeping results consistently between local and CI builds is we'd have a standardized Tianocore query suite where we would put all the queries like these that we want to run against the code. And whenever you give this command, you can give a hyphen download parameter, and it will actually reach out to GitHub. And if we upload our query suite, it will reach out and it will pull it down and run the queries inside the file. So that way, if you're running locally, you don't have to go gather all these .ql files or anything like that. All you have to do is get the query suite, and then you just give it the download parameter, and it will pull them all down and cache them local. It has an entire like management wrapper around all of this. So it has a concept of pulling the queries down, caching them locally in a folder on your system. And then in the future, whenever you run the command with the download flag, if you already have the queries downloaded, it won't download them again. So there is some level of support for being able to just simply run a command and have it pull the queries down and run them for you locally. So that's another kind of nice feature about all of this. And you can go look at the query kind of syntax on there. I thought I put a link. Well, I'm not seeing it. You can go look at that on the QL CLI page. And let me see where that's at. QL packs. And then here we want to search for a query suite. So you can write these files that look like, I'm trying to find a good example. Here we go. So you can start to choose, like, whenever you go look at CodeQL queries, one of the things they put is are these tags and what type of query it is. And so, like, for example, I go to this one and you see these tags here. They're saying that the kind of query is a problem. The severity is warning. The severity level is 7.8. The ID is this, and it's under the security and CWE 457 tags. So whenever I'm building a query suite, I can specify that I want to get all queries that are of a certain severity level and of kind problem. And it will just go find those, automatically pull them down and run them dynamically. So that's another way that you can build query files, is you don't have to just specify, you don't have to like hard code the queries. you can use these as parameters to be able to figure out what queries you want to go gather, and then it will pull them down and run them automatically. And there's examples on this page. So like here, they're saying they want to pull all the queries from all CodeQL CPP queries. So that's your query pack. And then from that query pack, they want to include all ones that have the security tag and their severity is high and very high. And that's another way that you can build up what kind of queries you want to run against. And they have some examples in here of like the other thing they put on CodeQL queries is the precision. So this is like how likely it is to produce false positives. So they put a precision tag in them of like whether the precision's low, anywhere from like low to high or very high on here. So you can go look at those and you can get an idea. I'll try to go to one more, like this use after free one. If I go to this one, you can see it has the tags reliability, security, and CWE 416, severity is 9.3, so very high, and it's a problem. But anyways, that's just another way to think about how you choose to write your own queries and them get picked up by people, and then also what queries can get brought into what we're running against.
Right. I guess what one challenge with that is that if new queries are added, then your database may look clean today, but it won't be tomorrow with no code changes.
Right. And then yeah, and then you just have to decide, like, do you want to be in a work model where people find things where basically if there's a new problem that pops up, you break and then you fix it if it's important enough, right? So like maybe things that are above severity 9.0 are so important that you want to be broken and fix them, or maybe you don't and you just bring them on as you want. I'm just saying that's another option that we can consider. Okay, what was your other question?
Well, yeah, one last question was I brought up the open of have you found any information about comparisons of things like some of the commercial tools against CodeQL, just as a the relative comparison between them?
No, I have not looked, I guess, very deeply for those comparisons.
Sure. And when I thought about that question that I brought up, that opener brought up earlier, and like another approach we could take is really any issues that we have tools that can just flag them and we can go fix them, as low hanging fruit. That's great, right? So maybe the approach we can take for Tianocore is, because CodeQL is basically integrated pretty well into GitHub, and it's easier to find and fix issues within that interface. Maybe we can start with CodeQL, and then if we find that there are maybe some number of issues that are found by other tools, like for example Open Coverity, that are not discovered by CodeQL, we then have the choice. We can either add more queries, custom queries to CodeQL to help find those things, or we could choose to run those other static analysis tools as a secondary one, maybe run less frequently, just as a cross check against what CodeQL is doing.
Right.
So I guess the idea of, is there something that we could deploy quickly and get lots of value from, and then kind of fine tune it if it needs fine tuning down the road after we've gotten rid of all the easy things to fix.
Yeah, I think that's another nice advantage to it, and it is one of the nice things about us being able to control these queries. I just wanted to show here, they're talking about queries. This place has a bunch that you can go look at. So this has 4,080. And it has lots of different, this is public. I'm not logged in or anything. It's just a lgtm.com. So this has a bunch of different queries that people have written for different languages. So you can look at anything like examples here, or anything from like Python to Java, and they have C++ on here as well. But you can come on here and you can also look at a bunch of different queries that people have contributed and written for different languages. So if there's any on here that we like, we can also pull those into our query pack pretty easily. Just another resource for things out there. There's other interesting stuff on here too, like alert suppression. Some of this applies to GitHub code scanning, which is what we are using and will be the future, and some of it doesn't, but you can just check this out if you're interested.
Okay, so for over the next week, using your discussion is kind of the best place to capture any open questions and work to resolve them. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. And then like I said, I'll be gathering some final information from the CodeQL team. I'll be monitoring the discussion and keeping in sync with people there and try to work towards getting a more formal proposal together that we can take action upon in the next week or so.
All right. Are there any more questions or topics on static analysis?
I don't have anything. I want to say thanks for doing the presentation and all the work. This really, it seems like a viable option. So I love it. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. One other follow-up from a previous conversation. The work around moving to GitHub Services in general. Mike, Kenny, I was going to propose to you that I'm basically working on a small static site that basically uses a static site generator to make the site where we could document our development process. So this would ultimately be the replacement of the GitHub Wiki. That we had that session where a number of people complained about it, and I think we've all experienced the difficulty around finding anything there. And so I thought that would be the best way to be able to collect feedback from others, let others contribute to that effort. And so I was going to stand up, and I've started doing it locally, but I haven't done it on GitHub yet, but stand up a repo. I'll start in my own personal place, but eventually I was hoping we could move it, if it looked acceptable, to Tianocore, and then we could use Tianocore to generate that site that would go up and be, you know, where our process is documented. Because I really was struggling,
that,
you know.
I mean, I think that requires a, you know, kind of a whole community, you know, agreement, because what I don't want to see is more scattering around of information. The fact that the wikis are not organized is really more of an issue of we don't have anybody that's been like cleaning them up and getting them reorganized. I actually don't mind the GitHub wiki interface as far as a way to go, you know, write, you know, some of our documentation. So I don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that just because it's gotten out of maintenance, it's bad.
All right. I think there was a number of pretty vocal complaints a few weeks ago about it, where, you know, the mention was that basically searching Google is way more effective than searching within the wiki. And the fact that it has no table of contents and basically just a search box makes it very scattered, and there's no kind of coherency to navigating through it.
Yeah,
at least
I
that
recall
was my take.
Rebecca had that concern as well, right?
Yep.
But,
and I've raised the
yep.
concern for a long time myself. I agree completely with the current state. It needs a complete revamp of what we have there to get it organized so that it's a, no matter what reason a developer or user has for coming to Tianocore, there's a easy walk up and use kind of, you know, set of experiences there for whether or not you're a firmware developer, a device driver writer, a shell user, platform firmware developer. What is your reason for even visiting the site, and how do I find the information for getting started or answering questions about that? It needs a lot of organization, And I don't necessarily believe that just going to yet another site generator is going to go, be the answer. All the material needs to be pulled together and organized better, no matter what is the hosting service.
So I agree with that assertion. However, it could be that the site generator is part of the reason that the search is so bad. Some of the site generators I've used don't do the best job with capturing the relevant information to make the site searchable, or the search itself is just not very smart. So that could be part of the problem.
Yeah, I don't know if we've enabled a true search box on our wiki. It's maybe we just haven't turned that on, right?
Yeah,
Possible.
I could do a little more looking, but I guess where I was going was the nice part about it, and I see your hands up, Laura. Give me 1 second. If we were to stand this up as a repo that was a little more of a traditional repo that would then, during a new commits would generate that site, you get the benefit of being able to have pull requests and people have comments on the content, and an easy way to contribute rather than go create a new wiki page. It is literally submit a PR.
That's how it works today for the wikis. It's a repo and you can do pull requests. The web view is not the only way to add content to the wiki. You can there's a separate repo address for the wiki.
Okay, I'll take a second look through it. My end result was I was trying to get to a place. Well, one, I didn't want to start with a whole bunch of stuff. That was the another downside of this. But I wanted to get to a place where we could try to lay out the process and all the labels that we talked about, all the potential for bots and just the process flows for all those things in a place that then people could contribute to and comment on. Our discussions clearly are not garnering enough. Our mailing list is not garnering enough feedback. So that's what I was hoping to stand up this next week. But I will go back and take a look through what we currently have and if we can fit it within there and get to that same effect.
Yeah, Sean, I know Laura has their hand up, but what site generator were you thinking about, just out of curiosity?
So I'm not attached to any of them. I've used an easy open source free one called MakeDocs that is easy, and I was just going to stand it up in that. It's all based on Markdown files. But again, and I know it has a decent search. I'm just looking for a way to kind of get to that end result.
Yeah, sure. Here's one that we use internally. It's based off MakeDoc, but it's a little easier. Handles a lot more of the junk kind of configuration for you. So if you're just looking for some fast results, I sent it in the chat.
Great. Laura, you have your hand up?
Yeah. Yes, so I am Lior, and about the documentation issue, I did a little repo that it's meant for starters. It has a little explanation about EDK's build system, and I think I find all the documentation that EDK or Tianocore made, and they kind of split it to subjects in the repo at the end. So if you want to reorganize things, maybe it will help.
Sure. Can you share a link to that?
Yes, I will do it right now.
Great. And yeah, I think as Mike mentioned, I think we definitely need a revamp, a cleanup of the documentation in general, whether it be the wiki or the site. Again, why I brought it today was that a few weeks ago, we proposed some changes to using GitHub Services for things like issues. And I wanted to find a place to document that where others could contribute.
Right. And I don't want us get slowed down by infrastructure things at all, Sean. I want the information captured and good discussions to occur. So so whatever you think is the fastest way that you can capture your ideas and get feedback from the community. Where it lands eventually, we can have that discussion later, but let's focus on sharing of ideas and refining of them as quickly as possible.
Sounds good. All right, I don't know if there's any other kind of updates on any of the past topics. I know Sunil said he had 2 topics to bring up.
Yeah, so probably I don't have much time. So basically, I wanted to check whether this is the meeting to discuss some of the refactoring work for supporting RISC-V architecture, or is there any other meeting? So currently, we are trying to. There are a lot of interest in EDK2's RISC-V. So we need. I mean, after Abner left, I got that responsibility. So we are trying to make it kind of pretty good standard, and also which adheres to the CI kind of framework. So I wanted some inputs. I sent out the POC patches for comments, mainly on the refactoring and whether that is the way to go, or is there some other way. The second logistical issue I wanted to check is there a architecture specific mailing list to filter out these EDK2 mails, because there is a lot of traffic going on in EDK2 main mailing list. So can we create something like EDK2 RISC-V or something like that, so that the people who are interested only in RISC-V can monitor that along? I mean, basically both will be copied in that. So is there a discussion in prior to that happened? So those are 2 topics. I know we don't have much time, so probably we can push it to next week also. That's fine. But yeah, those are the 2 topics.
So I can give you just a couple of quick answers, Sunil. If it's tools or CI related, this is a great forum for if you need something specifically about tools customization for RISC-V or CI additions for RISC-V. If it's about the firmware code, Ray Nee runs a biweekly Tianocore design meeting. So that's a great place to go review your, firmware changes if you want to have a review of the firmware changes. And then lastly, on the mailing list, there's a community meeting this week, and our community manager would be a great person to bring up the mailing list idea if you need new mailing lists or figure out how to go use the mailing list as far as which ones to use for those kinds of discussions, or if a sub list is required, and she can set up the sub mailing list if that's deemed a good idea for the community.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Let me check with Ray and the community meeting. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other topics for the day?
Just that I've sent an email. I've got the EDK2 code review repository stood up with some actions to do assignment of code owners and reviewers and checkers for that, and some sample PRs on there. And I've created the EDK2 reviewers team, which is required to have all collaborators be a member of Tianocore in order for them to be able to leave comments on pull requests. So pay attention to those emails and join reviewers if you have been asked to join the reviewers team. And I'm going to be putting a few more examples up there, and that's really about exploring the GitHub code review capabilities and part of the writing down the documentation for how we're going to use the GitHub review features for various types of code reviews that we do, whether it's single patch, multi-patch, and then also maintenance of the code owners and reviewers files themselves.
Okay, sounds great.
Had one other question concerning the documentation. Do we have any idea of where to start, how to start? I'm happy to help, with that, but I don't know where people think we should start fixing reworking the documentation.
Yeah, we might want to spin that off as a separate email conversation or separate meeting. It's a rich topic.
Yeah, writing documentation is difficult. And yeah, wouldn't be a bad idea. If we have another meeting, I'm fine with that for those interested.
Yeah, one last thing, I know we don't have enough time here to talk about it, is we probably need to have a future session on CI expectations. Because as you saw, I attempted to add CI to some packages missing CI and encountered some resistance. So I think we need to, as a community, have a shared understanding about the way that we validate our code and test it.
As in, all code must be built on every pull request and validated on every pull request?
Well, yeah, just as in we have an EDK2 CI process and any package in EDK2 is expected to use it type of a thing.
That kind of seems like a no-brainer, but okay. Yeah.
The other one, Mike, that came up was again a concern around spelling and how spelling isn't important. I think that's something I think a few months ago we talked about that, and we reiterated that we thought our code base needs to pass spell checkers and that they are worth it, even though there are some false positives. I think a couple packages just got their spell checking turned off because their maintainer was upset.
If we get enough attendance, it might be a good topic for the community meeting, because I agree with the need for CI and turning on as many checkers as possible. I am cognizant of the maintainers and the other package contributors, what time they have to go fix issues. So blocking everything immediately is probably not the best approach. Figuring out how to incrementally make things better and let them go at their own pace is probably the better approach, where you get the CI turned on at its minimum level, and then we can turn up the contrast as we move forward.
Okay, sounds good. I think my main point of bringing it up is we just need to like write down what our strategy is somewhere, so we don't have to like revisit the discussion on the mailing thread without, just being able to point to something and say this is the direction we're heading, type of a thing.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Agreed.
thank you.
All right. If nothing else, we'll break to next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye.